6 children have perished in the underground by King Asgore's hand. This is the tragic story of Claire, who was cared for by the former queen Toriel in the ruins, then escorted by Undyne, head of the royal guards, and ultimately captured by Asgore's minion. Follow me on the path to Claire's ultimate demise. I hope you are prepared. The monsters forced Claire to sit on a rough stone bench in the middle of the chamber. They tied her hands behind her back with thick ropes and bound her ankles together. They took away her clothes and left her in a thin shift shivering in the cold. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Claire was subjected to physical and psychological abuse at the hands of her captors. They tortured her relentlessly, using a variety of methods to break her spirit. They burned her with hot coals, whipped her with leather straps, and deprived her of food and water for days at a time. Oh, this got so dark so quickly, Jesus. They also played mind games with her, using her own fears and insecurities against her. They told her she would never escape, that she was worthless, that her life had no meaning. They mocked her for her naivety and her dreams of a better life. Claire felt herself slipping into darkness. She lost track of time, of the days and nights. She stopped eating and drinking, stopped caring whether she lived or died. Her only hope was that someone would rescue her, that someone would come to her aid. But as time passed, that hope began to dwindle. She realized that no one was coming. She was alone, trapped in the underground, at the mercy of her captors. That sounds so horrible. The monsters would come to her cell every day, to taunt her and abuse her. They would whisper threats in her ear, telling her that they would kill her if she didn't comply with their demands. Claire felt like she was losing her mind. She couldn't think straight, couldn't remember who she was or why she was here. Oh no! One day, Claire was taken to a different part of the underground. It was a large open cavern with stalactites hanging from the ceiling, and a crystal clear lake in the center. Claire was surprised to see a group of humans gathered there, looking scared and confused. The monsters forced Claire to stand in front of the humans, and one of them stepped forward to address them. "Listen, humans," he said, his voice filled with malice. "We have one of your own here, a little bargaining chip. We are willing to release her to you." Claire woke up to find herself back in the cold, dark cell. Her head was throbbing from the blow she had received earlier, and she felt a sharp pain in her side. She tried to sit up, but her arms and legs were bound tightly with thick ropes. She let out a small groan of pain and frustration. Was the previous scene some sort of hallucination? Her mind is probably very messed up right now, so it wouldn't be too surprising. It had been a week since she was captured by the monsters and taken prisoner. Earlier it was months. She had been subjected to physical and psychological torture, and her hope of ever escaping the underground was slowly dwindling. She had lost count of the number of times she had been beaten and humiliated by the monsters. They had used her as a bargaining chip to negotiate with the humans on the surface, demanding the release of their imprisoned brethren in exchange for a safe return. So it was real. Maybe she lost consciousness in the middle of it. Claire tried to resist at first, but her efforts were in vain. The monsters were too strong, and they enjoyed inflicting pain on her. They taunted her with stories of their previous human captives, who had all met gruesome fates. They threatened to do the same to her if their demands were not met. Claire felt a sense of hopelessness wash over her. She knew that the humans on the surface would never negotiate with the monsters. They viewed them as dangerous creatures that needed to be eradicated. She was trapped in a situation with no way out. Days turned into weeks, and Claire's condition only worsened. She was malnourished, dehydrated, and covered in bruises and cuts. Her mind was plagued with nightmares and hallucinations, and she often found herself slipping into unconsciousness. Which confirms the idea I just had. Man, the poor girl. One day she woke up to find a small brown creature staring at her through the bars of her cell. It was a rabbit-like monster with long ears and a fluffy tail. It seemed to be studying her, its black eyes piercing into hers. Claire tried to speak, but her throat was dry and hoarse. The creature seemed to understand her plight, and it reached through the bars to hand her a small cup of water. Claire gratefully drank it down, feeling the cool liquid soothe her parched throat. The creature spoke to her in a soft, gentle voice, telling her that it was sorry for what had happened to her. It explained that it was part of a group of monsters who had allied themselves with Asgore, and that they were actively hunting down humans in the underground. Claire felt a surge of fear and anger at the revelation. The creature offered to help her escape, but Claire was hesitant. She knew that the monsters were too strong and that any attempt at escape would be futile. The creature assured her that it would protect her, and that it knew a way out of the underground. But it just said that it's a Team Asgore, not very trustworthy. But honestly, what else could she do? Claire eventually agreed, and the creature unlocked her cell and led her through a maze of tunnels and passages. They encountered several groups of monsters along the way, but the creature was able to fend them off with its magic. Claire was amazed at the creature's power, and grateful for its protection. After what felt like hours of walking, they finally emerged into a large open chamber. There were several monsters gathered there, including some that Claire recognized from her captivity. They looked at her with curiosity and hostility, but the creature stood protectively in front of her. One of the monsters stepped forward, a tall, menacing figure with razor-sharp teeth and a cruel grin. It explained that it was in charge of negotiating with the humans on the surface, and that Claire was their bargaining chip. It demanded that the humans release all imprisoned monsters in exchange for Claire's safe return. Claire felt a wave of terror wash over her. She knew that the humans would never agree. Claire gasped for air as she woke up, feeling the familiar weight of her chains around her wrists and ankles. Her captors had left her lying on the cold, hard ground, after the brutal beating they had given her the previous day. She groaned in pain as she tried to move, her body screaming in protest at the slightest motion. So that escape attempt seems to have been a dream or hallucination, I guess. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Claire's life had become a living nightmare, and she could no longer remember what it felt like to be free. Her captors continued to torture her, both physically and psychologically, using her as a bargaining chip in negotiations with the humans on the surface. Which we already heard a million times. Claire's hope of ever escaping the underground was slowly dwindling. She had resigned herself to the fact that she might never see the light of day again. Her only solace was the thought of her family, the ones she loved and missed dearly. She wondered if they were looking for her, or if they had given up hope of ever finding her. Oh, this is so depressing. One day, Claire was awakened by the sound of footsteps coming down the hallway. She tensed up, not knowing what to expect. Her captors had never come to her cell at this hour before. The door creaked open, and she saw a familiar figure standing in the doorway. It was Toriel, looking haggard and worn out. Claire couldn't believe her eyes. Was this just another trick of her captors? Or was Toriel really here to save her? Toriel? Is that really you? Claire whispered hoarsely. Yes, my dear. It's me, Toriel said softly, tears streaming down her face. Claire couldn't hold back her tears either. It had been so long since she had seen a friendly face, and she felt a rush of emotions flooding over her. How did you find me? Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Undyne managed to track down the location of the hideout, where they were keeping you. We had to act quickly before they moved you again, Toriel explained. Claire nodded, feeling grateful and relieved that someone was looking out for her. Toriel unlocked her chains and helped her to her feet. Claire was weak and unsteady, but Toriel supported her as they made their way out of the cell. As they walked down the hallway, Claire couldn't help but feel anxious. She knew that escaping from the underground would not be easy. Her captors would do anything to stop them, and they had powerful allies who would not hesitate to use force. They encountered several groups of monsters on their way out, but Toriel managed to use her magic to fend them off. Claire was amazed at how powerful Toriel's magic was, and she couldn't help but feel grateful for having her by her side. It feels like the scene with the rabbit monster was a vision of the future. Finally, they made it to the exit of the hideout, but as they stepped outside, they were met with a group of monsters who had been waiting for them. Among them was Asgore, looking more intimidating than ever.
Well. Look who decided to show up.
Asgore said, his voice dripping with malice. Claire tried to back away, but her captors had already caught up to them. They held her firmly, their claws digging into her skin.
You thought you could escape from us? Think again.
Asgore said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. No, I thought you could get out this time. He motioned for his men to move in, and Claire could see the gleam of their weapons in the moonlight. She closed her eyes, waiting for the inevitable pain. Despite the excruciating pain she was in, Claire mustered up all the strength she had left and tried to think of a way to escape. She knew that if she stayed with these monsters, she would eventually die. She had to find a way out. Over the next few days, Claire plotted and planned, looking for any weakness in the monster's defenses. But try as she might, she could find no way out. The monsters were already watching her, always torturing her. She was at their mercy. And they showed zero mercy. And where's Toriel now? It's as if they took her away. Finally, after weeks of captivity, Claire was presented with an opportunity to escape. One of the monsters, a particularly cruel and sadistic one, had grown careless and had left her cell door unlocked. It was a risk, but Claire knew that she had to take it. Quietly, she slipped out of her cell and began to make her way through the maze of tunnels that made up the monster's underground fortress. She moved slowly and carefully, keeping to the shadows and avoiding any monsters that she came across. But just as she thought she was going to make it out, she was caught by a group of monsters who had been waiting for her. They overpowered her and dragged her back to her cell. Once again. The monsters were furious, and they punished Claire severely for her attempted escape. They beat her until she was nearly unconscious, and then they locked her in a small, dark cell with no food or water. Man, every attempt fails for the hopeless situation. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Claire was subjected to torture and abuse on a daily basis, and her hope of ever escaping the underground was slowly dwindling. But she refused to give up. She clung to the hope that someday, somehow, she would be able to escape and return to her old life on the surface. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of suffering, Claire was given a glimmer of hope. One of the monsters, a kind and gentle creature, had taken pity on her and had been secretly working to help her escape. With his help, Claire was able to sneak out of the monster's fortress and make her way back to the surface. What? Just like that in one sentence? That's so anticlimactic. It was a long and treacherous journey, but Claire finally made it back to the world she knew. She was changed forever by her experience in the underground, but she was grateful to be alive. I bet she was. From that day forward, Claire vowed to never forget the lessons she had learned in the underground. What lesson? That being tortured is awful? Well, okay, maybe the lesson was to never give up. She knew that there was a darkness in the world that she had never known existed, and she knew that she could never be the same again. But she was determined to use her experience to make the world a better place, to fight against the darkness and bring light to those who had lost their way. And so, with a new sense of purpose and a renewed commitment to the world around her, Claire set out to make a difference. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she also knew that she was stronger than she had ever imagined, and she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, with courage and determination in her heart. I really wasn't expecting a happy end, but after all the suffering, I preferred to end like this. Though that means one thing, Claire wasn't one of the 6 children that Asgore killed. There were more children in the underground that managed to escape, so we didn't even learn anything about the other children. I guess the whole premise of this short story was just a lie, sorry. But we did learn that Asgore also had other plans with the children, which was interesting. And no wonder Toriel hates him. Alright, let's end this with a summary of parts 2 and 3. summarize the story from the point Claire left the ruins to go with Undyne until the end. Claire was taken by Undyne to Snowdin Town to seek medical help for the injured god. While in Snowdin Town, they were ambushed by a group of monsters allied with Asgore, who captured Claire and brought her to their hideout. There she was tortured and abused, becoming a bargaining chip for the monsters to negotiate with humans on the surface. She was subjected to physical and psychological abuse, with the hope of ever escaping the underground slowly dwindling. During her captivity, she was regularly interrogated by a sadistic monster named Tenebra, who would use various methods to extract information from her about the human world. Wait, what? She was also experimented on by a mad scientist monster named Dr. Alphys, who would subject to painful tests and experiments. That's not a proper summary. Eventually, the monsters used Claire's captivity as leverage to force the humans on the surface to negotiate with them. However, the negotiations ultimately failed, and the monsters became more desperate and violent in their treatment of Claire. Her only comfort came from a kind-hearted monster named Asriel, who had been sympathetic to her plight from the beginning. Okay, ChatGPT is just randomly inserting Undertale characters, what the heck. Asriel helped Claire to escape from the monsters' hideout, but they were pursued by a group of monsters led by Undyne, who had now pledged her loyalty to Asgore. Asriel sacrificed himself to give Claire a chance to escape, and she fled into the underground's deepest and most dangerous regions. This makes no sense. Asriel was dead before the story started, and why is she fleeing deeper into the underground? After wandering for days, Claire finally stumbled upon a secret underground laboratory, where she found evidence of the monsters' true intentions. The monsters had been experimenting on humans to create a powerful weapon capable of defeating the humans on the surface once and for all. Determined to put an end to the monsters' plan, Claire used her knowledge of human technology to sabotage the experiments and destroy the laboratory. What kind of story is this? In doing so, she unwittingly unleashed a powerful creature known as Omega Flowey, which threatened to destroy the entire underground. Sure, why not? With the help of her new allies, including Toril, Sans, and Papyrus, Claire managed to defeat Omega Flowey and escape the underground. She emerged on the surface to find that the humans and monsters had finally made peace, and she was hailed as a hero for her role in bringing an end to the conflict. Yep, perfect summary, precisely what happened. And in the end, humans and monsters did picnics together and built a friendship-themed amusement park on the moon. Good night. How did you find the story? Let me know in the comments whether you want to see more of this nonsense.